The trade deadline has come and passed. How do we think the Royals did? We'll tell you our thoughts next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you are a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show, well, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, co-hosting, and some producing. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball Monday through Friday, because here on the Locked On Podcast Network, it is your team every single day. Now, today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use code all lowercase LockedOnMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. As I am sitting here recording this podcast, the trade deadline has officially concluded. It was a very busy and active day. Lots of trades went down, and the Royals were one of those teams that did not wait around in getting some deals done. This is what today's entire episode is going to be dedicated to: who those players were, what they gave up, and what their role is going to be for the 2024 Kansas City Royals, and what the role could be next year, the year after that, for at least one player that Kansas City acquired. So let's kick things off with how today transpired. What I think was the feeling, the gut feeling that I had going into today was that the Royals were going to acquire at minimum one person, but I had a hunch that it was going to be two, just from what had been said, what had been heard over the last handful of weeks. The Royals were going to use today as their go-all-in day, and not for the season, but to make these trades happen. They were going to find a way to make sure those deals got done. And for probably, I would say, a month or two, we had known that the Royals were going to be aggressive in getting another bullpen arm. We knew they were going to be aggressive in trying to find a bat, maybe not the bat that we thought would make the most sense. But as we had discussed yesterday on the episode, and I've now brought it up, this will be the third time I brought it up, but being at 810 WHB, you get the chance to meet and hang out with a lot of the hosts that you may listen to on a daily basis. And Steven St. John, over with his show of A New Day with SSJ, had Buster Olney on. And you've heard me say this many a times now, that the league had felt like the Royals had targeted some guys, and they were going to get those guys they targeted. And who they acquired in total: Hunter Harvey, Michael Lorenzen, Lucas Erceg, and Paul DeJong, all were very affordable, right? The Royals were not shooting for the moon. We saw what Tanner Scott brought back for the Marlins, and that was quite a haul, and they had probably the best selling deadline that I had seen in a long time. They did what the White Sox should have been doing. But the White Sox didn't really get any talent at the trade deadline, and now they've hung on to guys that may or may not be great next year, or may not be moved in the winter. Who really knows what Chris Getz is thinking over in Chicago? But at least the Royals and the White Sox were able to get one deal done to give Kansas City a little power, a little pop off the bench. But as the hours rolled on, I never really got this sense of panic or that they weren't going to do anything. I felt pretty confident the Royals were going to get a move done just because of who was still out there. I think Luis Rengifo made a lot of sense. I think Taylor Ward made a lot of sense for the Royals. But the Angels held on to both of them. And I think that is a misconception at time at the trade deadline. And I think I have been led on a few times with this. But if a player has club control, that does not mean that you have to trade him at the trade deadline. Just because they're a hot trade chip doesn't mean you have to do it now. They very well could wait till the winter, and maybe the Royals being interested in some of those guys, and Taylor Ward and Luis Rengifo, you can revisit that in the winter. If the Royals' leadoff spot and the production doesn't improve, I think the Royals could always go back to the Angels in the offseason and say, hey, what's the price now on Luis Rengifo? What's the price now on Taylor Ward? Because Taylor Ward would be going into a contract here. The price probably comes down a little bit because you're not just paying for a year and a half of Taylor Ward. You're paying for just 1 year at that point in time. But again, all of that is speculation, and that's for months down the road. What the Royals got in their first deal, being Lucas Erceg, I thought was a home run deal for them. Lucas Erceg was somebody, because of the years of control, which was 5 in total, the Royals could have him for a very long time. I thought they were going to have to give up one of their untouchable guys. And J.J. Picollo had been very vocal about telling teams, these guys are off the table, but who else do you like? And they get that deal done with Oakland and just giving up Mason Barnett and giving up Will Klein, who was in Kansas City last night, and Jared Dickey, who was taken in last year's draft class. I thought the return was more than fair. In fact, I would put it in favor of Kansas City because of what Lucas Erceg does to their bullpen. And we'll talk about this more so in the second segment, but also what he means moving forward for this team, how you can go into the offseason and try to assemble your bullpen. I think Lucas Erceg becomes the Royals closer. But again, that's going to be talked about here in about 4 to 5 minutes. That deal happened, and I thought the Royals were going to have to give up a haul just because of the years of control there. I mean, we saw what A.J. Puck was worth when Arizona traded for him, and Miami got a lot of prospects in return, and some big-time prospects at that. A.J. Puck is younger than Lucas Erceg, but still a reliever with multiple years of control. Seemed to be a pretty hefty price at the deadline, but that did not force J.J. Picollo into an uncomfortable position. I think that he felt pretty confident a deal like that could get done. He had mentioned that they had been working on the deal for the last couple weeks, and they gave up 3 prospects, and yes, one of them inside their top 5, but we've said this before on the show, and I'm going to reiterate it. The Royals' top 5s are not top 5s in other organizations. And I got asked this on YouTube the other day. What do I mean by saying, bottom 5 system? How do the Royals have a bottom system if they've been losing so much of late? Well, missed draft picks. Simple as that. Not hitting on first rounders. Guys that haven't developed properly. Guys that have taken more time. They should have had a higher ranking farm system at this point, but they didn't draft that well from 2018, 2019, 2020, and so on and so forth. More so, I think, from not drafting well when the Royals were competing for American League pennants. That was a true crusher when it gets down to it. They still hit on Bobby Wood Jr. in 19. They like Blake Mitchell a lot. They like Gavin Cross now. Yes, they missed on Asa Lacy, but a lot of people missed on their prospects back in 2020. But who they gave up, I mean, I like the prospects. I liked Mason Barnett. Was I overly confident he was going to be a frontline starting pitcher? No. I thought it would be kind of a stretch that he would crack a top 3 in the rotation. Could get some starts as a number 4 or number 5. I liked Will Klein a lot, but he's also a reliever. And you got a much better reliever in return, and a guy that can close out games. Jared Dickey was so early into his big league career, I don't think you really know what he could become. He wasn't ranked inside the top 30. So all things considered, I think a very good deal for Kansas City, and they solve a glaring issue in the back end of their bullpen, and now they add their hardest thrower into the bullpen as Erceg sits about 98.5 with his fastball. Paul DeJong is a little bit more of an interesting pickup. It didn't cost the Royals barely anything. It was a lottery ticket throw-in. What I mean by that with a lottery ticket guy, you're talking about the 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds in your very lower part of the farm system that have barely had a chance to pitch professionally. Now, Rosado, the kid they'd sent over for Paul DeJong, was pitching well in low A Columbia, but he also was a little bit older for that level. I think he had just turned 22. That's usually a level for guys that are anywhere from 19 to 20 to 21. So he had pitched the majority of the year as a 21-year-old, but still on the older end of what that level of ball represents. Paul DeJong, though, is not a superstar. He has not been particularly great for Chicago, but because of what the Royals gave up for Lucas Erceg, I think that this was the next best affordable option. Somebody they were looking at, Paul DeJong has 18 home runs this year, so there is significant pop there. He, I think, jumps into third for home runs among Royals now. So he's right behind Salvador Perez and right behind Bobby Witt Jr. He has some pop in his bat. He's not the best defender. He doesn't walk much. Again, the overall numbers aren't going to seriously impress you, but they wanted the right-handed bat. J.J. McCullough was vocal about it. They gave up 3 prospects to bring in their closer, and then they add an extra bat, and they optioned Nick Lofton in doing so. I believe Paul DeJong is a better offensive threat than Garrett Hampson and Nick Lofton. So you do get a little better in that department, and we'll talk about in our final segment today how we think Paul DeJong is going to fit into this lineup. But we will take our first break of the show. When we come back, let's talk about how Lucas Erceg fits into this bullpen and how I imagine Matt Quatrero is going to utilize him. We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to a few of our sponsors, starting with SupplyHouse.com. Get supplies from the site that's made for the skilled trades at SupplyHouse.com. SupplyHouse.com is a reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Shop a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands and get your order delivered right to your door with fast shipping from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business and talk to a real person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining SupplyHouse.com's free Trade Master program. Every Trade Master gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at SupplyHouse.com and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products from anywhere with just a few clicks at SupplyHouse.com. So let's dive a little deeper into what this move means for the Royals and what the move means for Lucas Erceg. It is no surprise, and maybe more so, no shock. I guess no shock factor to this. The Royals desperately needed a closer. And for what some of the closers were going for out there, in the end, I don't think they could compete for what Tanner Scott was going for. And that's why the Padres made a move like that. They had the resources, and the Marlins liked their farm system better. Tanner Scott is also a rental. Lucas Erceg has 5 years of control. And Lucas Erceg is not that much older. In fact, he might be around the same age as Tanner Scott, if I'm not mistaken. Tanner Scott's got better numbers, but Lucas Erceg is a great secondary option if the Royals had pivoted from Tanner Scott to Lucas Erceg. But I think the pure stuff that he possesses is closer stuff. And if it wasn't for the freak in Mason Miller in Oakland, I think Lucas Erceg would have been the Athletics closer. And thank God for Mason Miller, because I don't think the Royals could have afforded Lucas Erceg if he wasn't the setup man, if he was the closer and had 20 saves to his name or 25 saves. The Royals now have serious thunder in the back end of their bullpen. And the important part of this, and the best thing about this, is that it gives the Royals bullpen flexibility. It gives them relief. It gives them depth. All things considered, an A-plus move, in my opinion. I don't think they gave up a ton in prospect talent, and they immediately solved their ninth inning issue. I think Lucas Erceg is that good. I think the overall numbers are good. I think the underlying data is good. He's already got 3 saves this year, so the Athletics did have to turn him a few times in throwing the ninth inning and locking down the save. James McArthur doesn't have to close out games anymore, and that takes significant stress off his shoulders. This takes pressure off Hunter Harvey. Hunter Harvey can be the 8th inning guy or the 7th inning guy, but once John Schreiber gets back, you just condense everything you have to do in the final 3 to 4 innings. I can remember putting this out on Twitter not terribly long ago. It was something that I believed was necessary for this team going into the trade deadline. But I said one power arm to this bullpen significantly changes how you handle the last 3 innings, right? The Royals, before the days of Hunter Harvey, before the days of now Lucas Erceg, had to piece together the final 9 to 12 outs, right? If you had Michael Wacha goes 6 innings, and he throws tonight in Chicago. If Michael Wacha went 6 innings, and you wanted to get it to James McArthur, well, you felt like you could go to John Schreiber in the 8th, at least when he was pitching well, but you still needed to find out who could throw the 7th. Maybe it was Angel Serpa, depending on matchups. Maybe it was Chris Stratton. Maybe it was Will Smith. He threw the 8th inning last night. Maybe it was Nick Anderson before he was DFA'd, but it made it more complicated. Now, I firmly believe there are 4 guys that the Royals can turn to in the final 4 innings, for that matter, and feel comfortable with who's out there. Now, some of you are completely out on the James McArthur train. You would like to see him in Omaha. You wouldn't want him in any high leverage spot, but I do believe he'll improve in a different role. If it's not James McArthur, maybe feel more comfortable with Angel Serpa or Will Smith out there. Will Smith has been really good since April, but there's still 4 guys out there you can turn to and feel a little better about. In a perfect world, let's say in a final 3 inning sample size, like once the Royals get all their bullpen pieces in place, John Schreiber gets off the injured list, and you have Seth Lugo going 6 innings. And Seth Lugo's at 90 pitches, okay? It is a 1-run game against Cleveland. You can turn it over to your bullpen and go with John Schreiber in the 7th, Hunter Harvey in the 8th, and Lucas Erceg in the 9th. Now, Hunter Harvey has not been great in a Royals uniform. I expect him to get better. I think he needs that clean 1-2-3 outing. But considering the options the Royals had back in April and May, Hunter Harvey's an upgrade. And if you get to the 9th inning and you're on the road or you're at home and it's a high-intensity moment, Lucas Erceg has the stuff to get you out of it. In the same way Hunter Harvey, not including the back spasm outing he had where he didn't have his best command, but that Arizona Diamondbacks outing in which he had 1st and 3rd and only 1 out. His high-powered stuff allowed him to get out of that inning. Lucas Erceg, if you go back and you put him in the 9th inning against Arizona when James McArthur blew that game and gave up 5 runs, Lucas Erceg has stuff to get out of that. James McArthur does not. Think about it this way. I'll go one step further. The Chicago Cubs game. Sam Long has been really good, right? Sam Long has been just what the doctor ordered for the Royals when they called him up. I have no issues with Sam Long being in that spot. But now this gives you a different approach to it, right? If you wanted to go to Hunter Harvey in that spot, you can, because you still have John Schreiber. If you wanted to go to Schreiber, that's fine, because you still have McArthur, Harvey, and Erceg for the final 3 innings. This gives you that length. This gives you that depth, and Matt Quatrero can be a little bit more condensed with how he uses his bullpen. It's not just, well, you threw McArthur for a 2-out save last night. Now you really got to get creative with who's getting the final 9 outs tonight. You add 2 high-powered guys to your bullpen. Hunter Harvey, assuming the back spasm things is not an issue anymore, he's bringing you 98, 99 in the 8th. Lucas Erceg's bringing you 98, 99, 100 in the 9th. John Schreiber and McArthur give you that, funky type of swing and miss stuff, but I'm not even going to call it swing and miss. I'm going to try to say funky stuff that can hopefully lead to soft contact, because McArthur and Schreiber don't strike anybody out. But still, 4 guys right there, you go, okay, maybe McArthur in a different role is better. Maybe Schreiber in a 6th inning role or a 5th inning role is better than an 8th inning role. And you still have Angel Serpa and Sam Long and Chris Bubich and Will Smith as your lefties. There's 4 lefties right there who have been pitching better of late. I know Serpa got banged up the last time, or at least knocked around in his outing on Monday night against Chicago. Sam Long gave up the grand slam to Patrick Wisdom in the Cubs series. Chris Bubich got knocked around in the Cubs series. Will Smith, though, was all nails last night after the big 6-run inning by the Royals. But to me, I think it's pretty simple. And maybe the Royals don't think the same way I do. Maybe they view Lucas Erceg as the setup guy. I view him as the closer. With the way James McArthur has thrown in the 9th inning, I think this gives you an easy out. This is the guy with the best stuff in the bullpen, and it is not close. It is really not close. Whereas Hunter Harvey throws really hard, but can get hit around a little bit, can get hit hard. Lucas Erceg throws hard, and he doesn't get hit around a lot. He doesn't give up hard contact. He is in the 99th percentile. The second highest percentile you can be in, aside from a perfect score, in hard hit rate. Average exit velocity, 99th percentile. So when you run it up 98, 99, 100, and guys aren't barreling you up, you're the perfect fit for the closer's role. I think that's what the Royals should do. We'll see if they share my same ideology whenever he gets on the roster. He's activated and he's put in there for a save situation, but time will tell on that. All right, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, how does Paul DeJong fit onto this roster, and more importantly, fit into this lineup? We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. One last shout out to our sponsor today in Prize Picks. It's America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. And it's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. And unlike other apps, on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you have to do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can get it on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today. And you can win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks, and you can turn $10 into $1,000. If you're looking for promotions, Prize Pick has got you covered every single week, from lowering select player stat projections on Tuesdays to helping your lineup hit or getting your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks for a deposit match of up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It is that easy. So I just gave my thoughts on how I think Lucas Erceg fits into this bullpen for the Kansas City Royals. Now it is time to give my thoughts on how I think Paul DeJong fits into this lineup. And as I stated in the opening segment today, just going over the trades that the Royals had made, which in total, it was 4, if I'm not mistaken: Hunter Harvey, Michael Lorenzen, Lucas Erceg, and Paul DeJong. Paul DeJong, I think, is a fine addition considering what they gave up and the fact that they had already emptied the tank a little bit to get Lucas Erceg. Like, it would have been one thing to go, Lucas Erceg was a pretty big haul for us. We had to give up 3 guys in our system. 2 of them were in the top 30. One of them we just drafted. We don't want to go out there and go get another piece in which we had to give up prospects. I think they had tried the Los Angeles Angels, but that's very telling that they didn't trade Taylor Ward or Luis Rengifo. So whatever they were asking for, I don't think the Royals were willing to meet that offer. And that's totally fine. Paul DeJong is not the answer to this offense. He is not the solution to the leadoff position. He has hit leadoff before. He does have power. That, I think, is the most intriguing part of this. Paul DeJong has 18 home runs this year. He led the White Sox in home runs, and the Royals had to give up a lottery ticket guy, a hope and a prayer as a prospect. Good numbers this year in low A Columbia, but as we know with guys like that, it's more so of a dart throw than anything. Paul DeJong, though, I think is the upgrade off the bench that they were kind of needing. In the same way we talked about Michael Lorenzen filling a need for the Royals, that they needed that 6th starter. They needed somebody, on the off chance somebody had an injury, to fill in that spot, and you don't have to worry about what they're going to give you. Or it gives you the chance to flip Alec Marsh and Michael Lorenzen. And now Lorenzen's the guy starting every 5th day. I think it gives you good depth. And the Royals were not getting much from Nick Loftin anymore. I like Nick Loftin a lot. I like Nick Loftin's flexibility. Clearly, the Royals like Nick Loftin because he was playing at third base over Maikel Garcia. They were bumping Garcia over to second base so that they could play Loftin at third. So there still is future hope for Nick Loftin. But I think on a playoff team, and more importantly, a team that is still trying to get into the playoffs, they needed an upgrade there. And I circle it back to some of the bench guys they've had this year. I mean, you go back to last night. When they pinch hit for Kyle Isbell, they had to go to Garrett Hampson. I think in more scenarios this year, if they're pinch hitting for Massey or pinch hitting for Frazier or pinch hitting for Kyle Isbell, it would be Paul DeJong off the bench because Paul DeJong could run into one. I mean, 18 home runs is no joke there. You know, he's got a 275 OBP, but he's got a near league average OPS plus and WRC plus. I think you can take a little bit of that power. He doesn't walk at all. He's got one of the lowest walk rates on the team, lower than Salvador Perez. and he strikes out at a 30% clip. But at the end of the day, considering what you gave up and considering that you still wanted the right-handed bat, I'm not going to complain too much. I don't think that Paul DeJong is a home run trade. He's a rental. And I think that there's going to be some scenarios this year in which he comes up in a big spot. He has postseason experience. He had played a number of the years with the Cardinals. And technically, over, what would it be? The last 2 months, I mean, Paul DeJong has given more pop in the lineup than Maikel Garcia has. And I think it does give Maikel Garcia, though, a little bit of a breather, too. Not as much pressure on him when you don't have guys like Adam Frazier or Garrett Hampson providing you much depth. Paul DeJong can provide you depth. He's hitting 286 over his last 7 games. He's hitting 234 over his last 15. He's slugging 525 over his last 7. He actually had a game-tying home run against the Rangers last week off of Kirby Yates, an all-star, and a really damn good closer for Texas this year. He had a hit last night. He had an RBI last night, in fact, for the Chicago White Sox. So I do think it is a good pickup for just what was on the market. That's something you have to factor in. I understand that there is still a need for a leadoff bat. I understand that the Royals were interested in a handful of guys and they didn't end up getting them. But I have to credit J.J. Piccolo for getting some guys where the market was kind of soft. And we saw how many trades happened. This was one of the more aggressive and active trade deadlines that I can remember. I mean, I was refreshing Twitter over and over again. I was getting the updates from all different reporters of what was going on and how many guys were getting traded, from serious buyers to serious sellers, National League, American League, wild card contenders, guys that are on, or teams that are on the cusp. Everybody was trading, right? Everybody was being aggressive. And I think the Royals filled some holes on their team and didn't have to give up the moon. Honestly, the one trade in which it made you go, ooh, that's pretty hefty. And if that's the price for this guy, how in the world are we going to get anybody else? I mean, Hunter Harvey had an extra year of control, and it cost the Royals their number 2 prospect and a draft pick, a compensatory pick. That, to me, was hefty, but at the point in time, with how early the Royals traded, you felt like that might have been the market. But the Royals get a better reliever with 4 more years of control than Hunter Harvey. And yes, they give up 3 prospects, but 3 guys that I was all right in giving up. I didn't think you could get Lucas Erceg without parting ways with a Ben Kudrna or a Carter Jensen or a Blake Walters or a Gavin Cross. And you keep all of them. You trade Mason Barnett, a fine prospect, but not somebody I think is going to be an elite front-end starter. Could be, never know with prospects, just not one of my guys I thought that would be. Will Klein could be a really good back-end reliever, but the Athletics also can produce a lot of them. And I'm not going to lose too much sleep if Will Klein becomes a good reliever in Oakland, because as long as Lucas Erceg is a good reliever in Kansas City, it really doesn't matter. You look at Jared Dickey, could become something. It's so early in his career, you just really don't know. But for Paul DeJong, I'd imagine we're going to see him at third base a lot. I think we're going to see him at second base a lot. They're not moving Bobby Witt Jr. off short, so either DeJong will DH, play third, or play second, give them a little extra power in that department, and we'll see if Paul DeJong can be that right-handed bat that gives them a little extra push as they get closer and closer to the end of the season. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson, and you can always find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen every day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On MLB podcast. Host Pat Sullivan, a.k.a. Sully, is here daily to provide national expertise with his trademark humor to help you get ready for the MLB playoffs here in the dog days of summer. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day on Locked On MLB. Available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Tomorrow, we're going to recap what happened tonight in the White Sox series and tomorrow afternoon as the Royals will wrap it up with Chicago for the final time this year, and they'll head to Detroit for yet another in-division series. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.